When Marcus Thompson walked into a Denver jet hangar in mud-caked boots and overalls, every polished executive assumed he was lost. Within an hour, he would leave with a $4.2 million aircraft, a rewritten salesman's worldview, and a young mechanic's future forever changed. The morning sun cast long shadows across the private aviation hangar in Denver, Colorado, as Marcus Thompson stepped out of his weathered pickup truck. At 57, Marcus carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had spent decades working the land, his calloused hands and sun-weathered face telling stories of countless dawns in the fields. His wide-brimmed hat, faded denim shirt, and well-worn overalls marked him as an outsider in this world of gleaming jets and polished corporate executives. Marcus wasn't here by accident. This visit represented the culmination of a vision born from years of relentless hard work, innovation, and an unwavering belief that success wasn't defined by appearances but by results. As he walked toward the hangar entrance, the familiar weight of skeptical glances followed him, but Marcus had learned long ago that doubt was simply another obstacle to overcome. Marcus Thompson's story began in the wheat fields of rural Kansas, where he was born and raised on a struggling family farm. His parents had instilled in him two fundamental principles that would shape his entire life: never let circumstances define your potential, and always find ways to adapt when others refuse to change. These lessons would prove invaluable as Marcus inherited the family farm in his early 20s, facing the same financial pressures that had plagued his parents for decades. The farm stretched across hundreds of acres, but the profits remained frustratingly thin. Traditional farming methods and local markets provided barely enough income to survive, let alone thrive. For years, Marcus poured every ounce of his energy into finding solutions. He sold produce at local farmers' markets, took on seasonal labor during planting and harvest seasons, and even worked odd jobs during the harsh Kansas winters when farm work slowed to a crawl. Despite his efforts, success seemed elusive. The turning point came when Marcus made a decision that would separate him from his peers. He stopped following tradition and started innovating. While neighboring farmers continued selling their crops within a 50-mile radius, Marcus began thinking on a national scale. He recognized that by shipping directly to major metropolitan areas, he could eliminate middlemen, reach customers who valued quality, and command premium prices for his produce. The concept was simple in theory but revolutionary in practice. Banks viewed his expansion plans with suspicion, questioning whether a small-town farmer could compete with established agricultural corporations. Neighbors called his ideas foolish, warning him about overreaching and the dangers of abandoning proven methods. But Marcus possessed something that couldn't be taught or borrowed: an unshakable belief in his vision. His first breakthrough came when he secured a contract with a major grocery chain in Chicago. This single deal required Marcus to invest in refrigerated trucks, hire additional workers, and establish a distribution network that extended far beyond anything he had previously managed. The risk was enormous, but so was the potential reward. Over the following decade, Marcus systematically expanded his operation beyond traditional crop farming. He added dairy production, incorporating a state-of-the-art milking facility and processing plant. His meat production division followed, featuring grass-fed beef and free-range poultry that commanded premium prices in upscale markets. By the time Marcus reached his 50th birthday, Thompson Farms had become a regional powerhouse, supplying fresh, high-quality products to grocery chains across 12 states. The operation employed over 60 people, many of whom had been with Marcus since the early days of expansion. His success wasn't measured merely in financial terms, but in the families he supported and the communities he strengthened through his business practices. But Marcus wasn't content to rest on his achievements. At 57, he had identified the next frontier for his business: direct air delivery. A private jet would enable him to transport the most perishable and valuable products faster than any competitor, ensuring unmatched freshness while opening markets that ground transportation couldn't efficiently serve. The next time you encounter someone who doesn't fit your expectations, remember Marcus Thompson. Look beyond appearances, listen to their story, and recognize that the most extraordinary achievements often come from the most unexpected sources. Success, after all, isn't about where you start or how you look. It's about where you're determined to go and who you choose to bring with you on the journey. The automatic doors of the Denver hangar slid open with a whisper, and Marcus Thompson stepped into a world that had never been meant for men like him. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Around him, sleek jets worth millions of dollars gleamed under perfect lighting. The floors were polished to mirror shine. The air hummed with quiet conversations about deals that would reshape industries, spoken by men whose suits cost more than most people made in a month. And then there was Marcus. Work boots that had walked through Kansas soil that morning. Overalls that told the story of a man who understood what real work looked like. A wide-brimmed hat that had shielded him from 10,000 sunrises over wheat fields. He could feel the stares. The quick glances followed by longer looks. The subtle shift in conversations as people tried to figure out why someone who looked like a hired hand was walking through their exclusive world. But Marcus had learned something important over the years. Other people's assumptions about you don't become your reality unless you let them. And he hadn't come this far by letting other people define who he was. He was here to buy a jet. Not because he needed to prove anything to anyone, but because it was the next logical step for his business. Thompson Farms had grown beyond anything he'd imagined possible, and air delivery would give him advantages no competitor could match. Simple as that. Or so he thought. Richard Stevens saw Marcus coming from across the showroom floor. Everything about Richard screamed success. The perfectly tailored suit, the Italian leather shoes polished to perfection, the confident stride of a man who'd spent years selling million-dollar aircraft to Fortune 500 executives. Richard's trained eye swept over Marcus in seconds. The assessment was automatic, practiced, and brutally efficient. Work clothes. Calloused hands. The weathered face of manual labor. This man didn't fit the profile of someone who could afford what Richard was selling. But Richard was a professional. He'd approach politely, ask a few qualifying questions, and then politely direct this lost farmer toward the exit. It happened more often than you'd think. People wandering into places they didn't belong, dreaming dreams they couldn't afford. "Good morning," Marcus said, extending his hand with the confidence of a man accustomed to making deals. His handshake was firm, honest, the grip of someone who'd built his success with his own hands. "I'm here to purchase a jet for my business operations." Richard's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. His smile tightened just a fraction. The pause before his response lasted one beat too long. "You're here to buy a jet?" Those 6 words carried the weight of every assumption Richard had made in 30 seconds. The slight emphasis on "you're." The questioning tone. The careful politeness that barely masked his skepticism. Marcus had heard that tone before. In banks when he'd asked for his first loan. From neighbors when he'd talked about shipping produce to Chicago. From suppliers who'd doubted a small-town farmer could handle large-scale operations. But he'd learned something important about dealing with doubt. The best response isn't anger. It's quiet confidence. "That's right," Marcus replied evenly. "I've done my research. I know exactly what I need." Richard led Marcus to the crown jewel of the showroom, a Falcon 350 that gleamed like a piece of art under the hangar lights. $4.2 million of cutting-edge aviation technology, designed for the kind of clientele who measured success in private islands and corporate acquisitions. "This aircraft is designed for a particular clientele," Richard explained, his tone carrying just enough emphasis to make his meaning clear. "Are you certain this meets your requirements?" Marcus had to admire the skill of it. Richard wasn't being openly rude. He wasn't telling Marcus to leave. He was simply making it clear that people like Marcus didn't belong in this world, didn't understand machines like this, couldn't afford the lifestyle they represented. "The specifications look excellent," Marcus said, running his hand along the aircraft's smooth exterior. "How much cargo weight can it handle?" Richard hesitated. This wasn't going according to script. People who wandered in here by mistake usually got intimidated and left by now. "Well, most of our clients use it for executive transport," Richard said carefully. "Are you sure it's suitable for your needs?" "I'm transporting produce, not passengers," Marcus explained. "Weight capacity is critical for my operation." "Produce." Richard repeated the word like it was foreign to him. He glanced at Marcus's boots again, this time letting his gaze linger on the traces of Kansas soil. "Mr. Thompson." "Marcus Thompson." "Mr. Thompson, this is a luxury aircraft. It's not exactly a delivery truck." There it was, the line drawn in the sand. The moment when Richard's professional mask slipped just enough to reveal what he really thought about farmers who dared to dream above their station. Marcus felt something familiar rise in his chest. Not anger, he'd moved beyond anger years ago. Something calmer but more powerful. The quiet strength that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're worth, regardless of what anyone else thinks. But before Marcus could respond, another voice joined the conversation. "Good morning. I'm James Wilson. Can I answer any questions for you?" James Wilson looked like he belonged in this world just as much as Richard did. Same expensive suit, same polished appearance. But something in his tone was different. Professional without the condescension. respectful without the skepticism. Mr. Thompson is interested in purchasing an aircraft for business transport, Richard said, his voice tight with barely concealed frustration. James glanced between them, reading the tension immediately. He'd seen this dynamic before, the clash between old assumptions and new realities. He'd also learned something his colleague apparently hadn't. In the aviation business, you never knew who might surprise you. The Falcon 350 is an excellent choice for cargo operations, James said, addressing Marcus directly. Maximum cargo capacity is 2,800 pounds, with modifications available for specialized transport needs. Would you like to step inside and take a look? For the first time since walking into the hangar, Marcus felt like he was being treated as a serious customer rather than an intrusion. Yes, he said. I'd like that very much. As they climbed the stairs into the aircraft's cabin, Marcus could feel Richard's discomfort radiating behind them. This wasn't how these conversations were supposed to go. People who looked like Marcus Thompson weren't supposed to climb into $4 million jets and discuss cargo modifications. But the aircraft's interior spoke for itself. Leather seats, polished tables, enough space for both passengers and cargo. Marcus could already visualize the logistics, crates of premium produce flying from Kansas to exclusive restaurants in major cities. Same-day delivery of organic vegetables to high-end grocery chains. The competitive advantage would be unprecedented. Impressive, Marcus said, his tone thoughtful rather than awed. He wasn't some tourist gawking at luxury. He was a businessman evaluating a tool. Richard couldn't stay quiet any longer. You'd need extensive modifications, he said sharply. Jets like this aren't typically used for hauling produce. Marcus turned to face him, his expression calm but piercing. And yet, they can be. Efficiency is efficiency, no matter what you're transporting. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Richard's assumptions were bumping up against Marcus's quiet confidence, and the collision was creating friction that James could feel from across the cabin. It's true, James said, stepping into the moment with practiced diplomacy. We've customized aircraft for various specialized business purposes. It's all about meeting your specific operational needs, Mr. Thompson. But Richard wasn't ready to let go of his prejudices. What kind of operation are you running, exactly? He asked, the question loaded with condescension. If you don't mind my asking. This was the moment Marcus had been expecting. The moment when he would have to decide whether to walk away or stay and prove exactly who he was dealing with. He chose to stay. Not for himself. He'd stopped needing to prove himself to people like Richard years ago. But because sometimes, the only way to change minds is to present them with truths they can't deny. Marcus paused, looking out at the hangar through the aircraft's window. Beyond those walls, his trucks were probably delivering fresh produce to grocery stores across 12 states. His employees were working jobs that provided for their families. His business was generating revenue that most companies could only dream of. When he turned back to face Richard, his voice was steady, matter-of-fact, carrying the weight of absolute truth. I own and manage Thompson Farms, he said. We supply fresh produce, dairy, and meat to grocery chains across 12 states. My team includes over 60 employees, and last year we generated $15.3 million in revenue. The silence that followed was profound. Not just the absence of sound, but the complete suspension of assumptions, prejudices, and preconceived notions. Richard's carefully controlled expression cracked. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. The number seemed to hang in the air like something physical, impossible to ignore or dismiss. 15 million, he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. That's right, Marcus confirmed. And we're growing. Demand keeps increasing, and this jet will help us meet it. My customers depend on quality and speed, and that's exactly what I intend to deliver. James looked genuinely impressed, nodding with the respect of one businessman recognizing another's achievement. But Richard seemed to be struggling with a fundamental recalibration of reality. Aye, that's quite an operation, Richard stammered, trying to recover his professional composure. I didn't realize. You didn't ask, Marcus said simply. His voice wasn't angry, wasn't bitter. Just factual. You looked at me and assumed. The words were delivered without malice, but they hit like a physical blow. Richard's face flushed as the truth of his own behavior became undeniable. He'd spent 20 minutes treating a multimillionaire businessman like an unwelcome intruder, all because of how that businessman chose to dress. Mr. Thompson, James said, his tone carrying genuine respect now, I believe this aircraft could be an excellent fit for your needs. Would you like me to connect you with our customization team to discuss modifications? I'd appreciate that very much, Marcus replied. Let's make it happen. As they exited the aircraft, Richard walking behind them in uncomfortable silence, Marcus felt something he'd experienced countless times before, the satisfaction of watching prejudice collide with reality and shatter into pieces. But this story wasn't over yet, because the most important moment of the day was still to come. As the paperwork discussions continued and Richard slowly transformed from skeptic to eager salesman, whether motivated by guilt or genuine respect, Marcus couldn't tell. Something across the hangar caught his attention. Near the main entrance, a young Hispanic man in maintenance coveralls was speaking earnestly with a supervisor. The young man's posture was respectful but determined, his hands gesturing as he made what was clearly an important point. The supervisor's body language told a different story, arms crossed, expression skeptical, the stance of someone who'd already made up his mind. Marcus had seen this scene before. In banks, in corporate offices, in countless situations where someone's potential was being dismissed because they didn't fit the expected profile. The young man caught Marcus's eye for a moment, and something in his expression, hope mixed with resignation, struck a familiar chord. "Excuse me for a moment," Marcus told James and Richard, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd just demonstrated exactly why underestimating people was a mistake. He walked over to the group, his boots echoing across the polished floor. The supervisor turned toward him, expression shifting to immediate respect as he recognized the man who'd just purchased a $4 million aircraft. "Is there a problem here?" Marcus asked, his tone polite but commanding. The young man straightened, hope flickering in his eyes. "I was asking about the apprenticeship program for aviation maintenance," he said. "But I don't think I have the right qualifications." The supervisor looked uncomfortable. "Well, sir, it's not that Carlos isn't capable. We just have many applicants, and we typically prioritize those with more formal experience." Marcus had heard this song before. He knew the lyrics by heart. "Experience," he repeated. "Or something else?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. The supervisor's face reddened slightly, but he maintained his position. "We have to consider all factors, sir." Marcus turned to the young man, Carlos. "What's your background?" "I've been working on engines since I was 12, Carlos said, his voice growing stronger. "Cars, trucks, farm equipment. I can take apart and rebuild almost anything. But I don't have formal aviation training." "And you want to learn?" "Yes, sir. More than anything. I've been studying aviation mechanics on my own for 2 years. I know I could do this work if someone would give me a chance." Marcus saw himself in this young man. The same hunger, the same determination, the same frustration of being dismissed before being given an opportunity to prove himself. But Marcus was in a different position now. He had influence. He had leverage. And he had a choice about how to use both. "I don't know much about aviation maintenance," Marcus said, his voice loud enough for everyone in the area to hear clearly. "But I do know talent and determination when I see it. This young man has both." He turned to the supervisor, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I'm purchasing a jet from this facility. That aircraft will require regular maintenance and service. If I'm going to trust your team with my investment, I want to know you're giving opportunities to people who are willing to work for them." The supervisor's entire demeanor changed. Suddenly, Carlos's qualifications looked much more promising. "Of course, sir. We'd be happy to reconsider his application for the apprenticeship program." Marcus nodded, satisfied but not finished. He turned back to Carlos, his voice dropping to a more personal level. "I've been where you are," he said quietly. "I've faced rooms full of people who looked at me and decided what I was worth before I said a word. Don't let anyone tell you what you can't become. If they won't give you a chance here, find someone who will. But I have a feeling," he glanced meaningfully at the supervisor, "that won't be necessary." Carlos's eyes filled with gratitude and determination. "Thank you, sir. I won't forget this." "Neither will I," Marcus replied. "Make the most of it." As Marcus walked back toward James and Richard, he could feel the energy in the hangar had shifted. Word was already spreading about the farmer who'd bought a jet and stood up for the maintenance apprentice. People were looking at him differently, not as an intruder in their world, but as someone who belonged wherever he chose to be. Richard approached him with an expression Marcus had never seen on the man's face before, genuine respect mixed with something that might have been shame. "Mr. Thompson," Richard said, his voice quieter than before, "I owe you an apology. I misjudged you completely." Marcus studied him for a moment. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last." Still, it was wrong. professional and personal. Richard's voice carried the weight of someone genuinely confronting their own prejudices. I'll make sure everything with your purchase moves smoothly from here. And I'll personally oversee the customization process. Marcus nodded slowly. Fair enough. But even as he accepted Richard's apology, Marcus couldn't help but wonder about all the other people who faced similar judgments. The ones who didn't have the resources or influence to demand respect. The ones who walked away from opportunities because someone else's assumptions made them doubt themselves. That thought stayed with him as James finalized the paperwork, and Richard, transformed now from skeptic to advocate, discussed modification timelines and delivery schedules. The business transaction was important, but the human moments mattered more. An hour later, Marcus was behind the wheel of his pickup truck, driving away from the Denver hangar with a signed contract for a $4 million aircraft. The sun was higher now, casting different shadows across the landscape, but the man driving was fundamentally the same person who'd arrived that morning. He hadn't changed. But he'd changed others. And sometimes, that's how real transformation happens, not through grand gestures or dramatic speeches, but through quiet dignity in the face of prejudice, and the willingness to use your success to lift others up. Marcus thought about Richard, probably questioning every assumption he'd ever made about people who didn't look successful. He thought about Carlos, who would start his apprenticeship program with hope instead of resignation. He thought about the supervisor, who might think twice before dismissing the next determined young person who walked through his doors. The jet was important for his business. It would open new markets, create competitive advantages, and help Thompson Farms continue growing. But the real victory wasn't measured in cargo capacity or flight speed. It was measured in moments when human dignity triumphed over prejudice, when character mattered more than appearances, when someone refused to be diminished by others' limitations. Today, if you visit that Denver hangar, you'll find some interesting changes. Carlos Martinez isn't an apprentice anymore. He leads a maintenance team, known throughout the facility for his skill and dedication. The apprenticeship program actively recruits from diverse backgrounds, looking for talent and determination rather than just formal credentials. Richard Stevens became one of the company's most successful sales representatives, known for treating every customer with respect regardless of their appearance or background. He tells Marcus's story to new employees, a reminder that assumptions can cost more than money. They can cost opportunities to connect with remarkable people. And Thompson Farms. The jet wasn't just a business tool, it was a statement. A declaration that success doesn't have a dress code, dreams don't check your bank account before taking flight, and the most extraordinary achievements often come from the most unexpected people. Marcus still wears his work boots and overalls when he visits the hangar for routine maintenance. Not because he has to, but because he chooses to. Because authenticity isn't about what others think you should look like, it's about being comfortable with who you are, regardless of the setting. But here's the thing about stories like Marcus Thompson's, they're not really about one person. They're about all of us. Every single person watching this has faced a moment when someone looked at them and made assumptions. When someone decided what you were worth before knowing who you were. Maybe you were the kid from the wrong side of town applying for college. Maybe you were the woman in the male-dominated industry. Maybe you were the person whose accent didn't sound professional enough, whose clothes weren't expensive enough, whose background wasn't impressive enough. Marcus's story is a reminder that those people who doubt you, they're not the ones who define your worth. Your worth comes from your character, your determination, your willingness to keep pushing forward when everyone else says you should give up. And when you finally succeed, not if, but when, remember Marcus's choice in that hangar. He could have bought his jet and walked away, satisfied with proving Richard wrong. Instead, he used his moment of influence to change someone else's life. That's the real lesson here. Success isn't just about what you achieve for yourself. It's about what you do with that achievement to make the world a little better for the next person who doesn't fit the mold. The next time you see someone who doesn't look like they belong, remember Marcus Thompson. Look beyond the surface. Listen to their story. Recognize that the most extraordinary achievements often come from the most unexpected sources. Because success isn't about where you start or how you look. It's about where you're determined to go and who you choose to lift up along the way. And that, friends, is a story worth living. From the wheat fields of Kansas to the private jets of Denver, Marcus Thompson proved that dignity, determination, and character will always triumph over prejudice. His journey reminds us that we're all more than what the world sees. Our dreams are valid regardless of our appearance, and our perseverance always matters. If this story inspired you, remember to carry its message forward. The next time you meet someone who doesn't fit your expectations, think of Marcus Thompson. Look deeper, listen longer, and maybe, just maybe, you'll discover that the person standing in front of you is exactly the kind of extraordinary you never knew you were looking for.